I was standing in the checkout line at Barnett's Market, our local grocery store, when my daughter-in-law leaned toward the young cashier and said, "Oh, don't mind her, she's just the maid." She didn't look at me. She didn't smirk or laugh. She said it like a fact, like it was the most normal thing in the world. The cashier, barely 20, by my guess, froze mid-scan. His eyes darted between me and her. Confused, I still had my hand on the grocery divider. A bag of green apples waiting to be weighed. I felt the words settle into my skin like a slow burn. The girl who used to kiss my cheek on Thanksgiving, who cried in my lap after her miscarriage, now reduced me to just the maid, in public. Loud enough for the woman in line behind us to hear. I didn't speak. I didn't flinch. I simply smiled, like I hadn't heard her at all. Then I reached into my purse, pulled out a crisp 20, and paid for the apples myself. "I'll carry these, thank you," I told the cashier softly. He nodded, still unsure what had just happened. As we walked out, she didn't say a word, just scrolled through her phone like nothing had happened. I followed, 2 steps behind, holding the apples like a servant on errand. In that moment, I knew I had become invisible in my own family. We walked back to the car in silence. She didn't offer to help with the groceries. Not that there were many, just a bag of apples, a carton of milk, and a loaf of bread. Essentials, for a house that barely felt like mine anymore. As she unlocked the passenger side, I opened the back door instead. I didn't want to sit next to her. Not today, maybe not ever again. The ride home was short, less than 10 minutes, but it stretched like rubber pulled too tight. She hummed along to a pop song playing on the radio, tapped her nails on the steering wheel, never once glanced in the rearview mirror. I looked out the window and counted the cracks in the sidewalk. The ones I used to jump over while walking Wade to school. Back when he still held my hand. Funny how memories can ambush you like that, soft and sharp at the same time. When we pulled into the driveway, she didn't wait. She got out, grabbed her own shopping bag, and walked in. The door closed behind her with a soft thud. I stayed in the car. The engine ticked as it cooled. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked. 2 kids rode by on bikes, laughing loudly. I sat there with the bag of apples in my lap and realized I hadn't spoken a single word since the cashier asked, "Would you like a bag?" I hadn't said yes. I hadn't said no. I just nodded. I brought the groceries inside a few minutes later. The house was quiet, too quiet for midday. I passed the living room where my framed wedding photo used to sit on the mantel. Now it was gone, replaced by a modern vase filled with artificial orchids. Her style, not mine. In the kitchen, I found a sticky note on the counter. "Dinner at 7. Wade wants beef stew." "No, please. No, thank you. Not even, Mom." Just an order, written like I was the help. I boiled water for tea. My hands moved on their own. Muscle memory from decades of routine. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I just poured the water into a chipped mug, one of the few items that hadn't been swapped for her sleek white sets. I carried it to the back porch, sat in the wicker chair that creaked a little more each year, and stared at the fence I'd painted with Wade when he was 12. One of the slats still had a smudge where he'd dropped his brush. That little smudge made me smile. But it didn't make the heaviness go away. She called me, just the maid, in public. Not once, not by accident, but with intent, with precision. That wasn't a slip of the tongue. That was a statement. And deep down, I think she meant it. Dinner was quiet, like always. Wade sat at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone between bites of stew. His hair was a little longer than usual, and the lines around his eyes deeper. I wondered if he even noticed. Across from him, she talked about renovations, new backsplash for the kitchen, floating shelves in the guest bathroom. She said, guest, but I knew she meant my bathroom. I served them first. I always did, not because I had to, but because it was how I showed love. That's what I told myself. Now, it felt like routine, like duty, like I was expected to plate the stew, refill the water, clear the dishes. No one asked if I'd like a glass of wine. No one even noticed I hadn't eaten yet. Halfway through the meal, she said something that made Wade chuckle. "And Mom," she added casually, "could you clean the upstairs window tomorrow? The one in the baby's room? It's streaky." She didn't look up when she said it. just kept sipping her sparkling water. Perfectly manicured nails tapping the side of the glass. Wade didn't say anything, he just nodded, like it was a reasonable request. They hadn't told me about the nursery. I hadn't known they were trying again. The first time, I was the one who took her to the appointments. The one who made ginger tea when she was sick. Who bought the baby blanket months before the due date. When she lost the baby, I held her as she sobbed into my sweater. Now, I was a maid who should clean windows. After dinner, I did the dishes. I could hear them laughing in the living room, watching some reality show, the TV echoing through the hall. When I walked by, Wade looked up and said, "Thanks, Mom." Just that, nothing more. It used to mean something. Now, it felt like a pat on the head, like someone thanking a waitress for bringing the check. I went upstairs to my room, the smallest one in the house. It used to be the sewing room. I kept my belongings in a modest closet, next to boxes of things she said she'd sort through eventually. None of them were mine. I sat on the edge of the bed, folded my hands in my lap, and stared at the closed door. It wasn't anger I felt. It wasn't even sadness anymore. It was something colder, something quieter. Recognition. She didn't want a mother-in-law. She wanted someone silent, helpful, invisible. And somewhere along the way, I let her believe that's who I was. I couldn't sleep that night. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that hums in your ears, heavy, restless, full of things unsaid. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind press against the windows. From down the hall, I could hear them talking. Low murmurs, a laugh, then the sound of their door clicking shut. Years ago, that was my room. The master bedroom with the bay window and the cherry wood dresser Noel and I bought on our 10th anniversary. He assembled it himself, cursing softly when the screws didn't fit right. We laughed so hard that night, we forgot to make the bed. Now it was theirs. When Wade asked me to move in after Noel passed, he said, "You'll always have a place here, Mom." He meant it, I think, but somewhere between then and now, the invitation turned into obligation, and then into burden. The next morning, I made breakfast, as usual. Pancakes, eggs, sliced strawberries, Wade's favorite since he was 7. He didn't say much, just grabbed a plate and disappeared into the garage to take a call. She waltzed in 10 minutes later, wearing a silk robe and scrolling her phone. "Oh," she said, looking at the spread, "that's sweet. Can you also run the vacuum upstairs later? I think the guest room's dusty." The guest room? My room. I nodded, placing a plate on the counter for her. She didn't touch it, just poured herself oat milk and left it sitting there while she FaceTimed a friend. I ate standing up, near the sink. Mid-morning, I started the laundry. When I reached into the dryer, I found my blouse, one I'd worn for Wade's graduation, wrinkled and crumpled beneath her gym clothes. The same blouse she once complimented, saying it reminded her of her mother. Now it smelled like her lavender detergent. I folded it carefully, smoothing the fabric even though I knew I'd likely never wear it again. Back in my room, I opened the drawer where I kept Noel's old watch. I hadn't touched it in months. It was still set to 6:45, his usual wake-up time. I pressed the stem to adjust it, but stopped. It didn't feel right to move it forward. Like I'd be erasing him. I sat on the bed with the watch in my palm and thought about all the things I had let slide. The decisions I hadn't made. The boundaries I never drew. Because I wanted peace. Because I thought silence was strength. But what if silence had become surrender? She didn't ask me to move in so I could heal. She accepted me so she could control me. One room, one role, one name, maid. I set the watch down and picked up a pen. I started writing a list. Not chores. Not groceries. But everything that used to be mine. It was supposed to be a normal afternoon. I had just finished vacuuming the stairs. As she'd asked, my knees ached with every step. But I didn't complain. Complaints didn't belong here, not from me. On my way back from taking out the trash, I checked the mailbox, bills, a catalog, and one thick white envelope with my name misspelled. Myrtle, instead of Myrtle. Strange, I thought. I hadn't ordered anything. No return address, no logo, just a plain envelope. I brought it inside and opened it with a butter knife. Inside was a neatly folded document. My eyes scanned the heading. Notice of title transfer, pending final signature. The house address matched this one. My address. But the names on the deed? Wade. And her. My name wasn't listed anywhere. I blinked. Read it again. Then again. It was some kind of finalization letter, confirming transfer of ownership. It mentioned a trust, legal fees, and something about removal of extraneous parties. Extraneous. That's what I was now. I checked the date on the envelope. It was from last week. I checked the trash can by the door. Under yesterday's paper, I found another envelope just like it, ripped in half. So this wasn't a one-time mistake. This one had my real name on it. They had thrown it away. Deliberately. I sat down at the kitchen table. The vacuum cleaner still buzzing faintly upstairs where I'd forgotten to turn it off. My fingers trembled, but I didn't cry. I just stared at the line that said, "Occupants will be informed of transition timeline post-signing." Occupants. Not family. Not Mom. That night, I said nothing. At dinner, she asked if I'd be a darling and pick up dry cleaning the next day. Wade reminded me to water the backyard plants, his new bonsai collection. I smiled, nodded, cleared the plates. But something inside me had shifted. A click. Like a lock that had been jammed for too long, finally falling into place. I went upstairs early, closed my door softly. And for the first time since moving in, I locked it. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I didn't make breakfast. I didn't empty the dishwasher. I didn't fold the laundry from last night's dryer cycle. I didn't refill her almond milk. I just sat at the kitchen table with the document from the envelope, reading every word until it stopped feeling like a shock and started feeling like strategy. They weren't just planning to push me out emotionally. They were setting the legal groundwork. They were preparing for a future that didn't include me. At 9:30 a.m., she walked into the kitchen in leggings and a fresh blowout. "No coffee?" she asked, glancing at the cold pot on the counter. "We're out of oat creamer again." I didn't answer. She blinked, taken aback by my silence. "Did you hear me?" she said, louder now, almost annoyed. Still, I said nothing. I stood up, took my purse, and walked out the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't leave a note. I just left. It was the first time in months I'd done something entirely for myself. I took a cab to First National Bank, where Noelle and I had our joint account since 1987. The same teller, Mrs. Kilpatrick, was still working behind the counter. She recognized me immediately. "Myrtle, sweetheart, I haven't seen you in ages. I need to see the status of all accounts associated with my name," I said. My voice was calm, firm. She raised an eyebrow but nodded. It took 20 minutes to pull the reports. Only one account remained under my name, an old savings account with $1.246 in it. Everything else had either been closed or transferred to a trust under Wade's name. Some had been signed over years ago, in small pieces, others more recently. "Do you remember making these changes?" she asked gently. I shook my head. I didn't remember signing anything. But I did remember trusting too easily, especially when grief made me tired. When Wade said, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll take care of everything," I thanked her and left the bank with a folder of printed statements in my bag and a fire in my chest. That afternoon, I skipped lunch. Instead, I opened the attic. It had been years since I'd climbed that ladder. But I knew what I was looking for. The safe. It wasn't big, just enough to hold the original deed, our marriage certificate, and a few letters Noelle had written when we first got married. I remembered the combination, my wedding date. Inside, everything was still there. But tucked underneath the envelope marked, "For Myrtle. If anything happens to me," was something I hadn't expected, a notarized letter. Dated 1 month before Noelle passed. I unfolded it slowly, my hands steady for once. He had written a note to his attorney. A backup instruction. A warning about pressure from external parties, and a request to reassess spousal rights if anything seemed amiss. Noelle had known something was off. I sat on the attic floor for a long time, the letter in my lap, surrounded by dust and insulation and the smell of old cardboard. Downstairs, the house buzzed with their lives. The sound of her blender. Wade's voice on a Zoom call. I stayed where I was. Because for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't even angry. I was ready. The next few days, I became a ghost with purpose. I cooked. I cleaned. I smiled when spoken to. But I also watched. I watched how she handled mail, always sorting it before anyone else could see. I noticed how Wade signed papers without reading them, how she kept a locked drawer in the study and never left her laptop open. Every moment, every detail, was logged in my mind like a ledger. On Thursday afternoon, I volunteered to pick up the dry cleaning. She handed me her phone with the confirmation email. I copied the sender's email address before I left the house. Back home, while they were out at a friend's dinner party, I used the computer in the upstairs guest room, my room. The password hadn't changed. It was still Baby 2020, the year she lost the first baby. I never told her I knew. Inside her inbox, I didn't find one surprise, I found many. A string of emails between her and a real estate agent. Subject line: prep for listing, discreet inquiry. Photos of the house, my house, staged and spotless. In one thread, she wrote, "Once the transfer's finalized, we'll push the listing live. The occupant will be out before then, legally clean." Occupant. Like I was a stray animal to be removed before a showing. I printed everything, highlighted the worst lines, stapled them to the bank statements, and tucked it all neatly into a manila folder. That weekend, they hosted a brunch. Their friends came, glasses clinked, laughter echoed in the living room. I stayed mostly in the kitchen, replenishing quiche and wiping down counters. But I listened. I heard her say, "We're planning to sell before summer. Market's hot." One of the guests asked, "Won't that be hard on your mom-in-law?" She laughed. "Oh, she's sweet, doesn't ask questions, practically part of the furniture." I gripped the edge of the counter. Not out of anger, but to keep from smirking. Because the furniture was about to stand up and speak. The next day, I went to see Mr. Halbrook, our old family lawyer. He had retired, but still took meetings out of a small office above the pharmacy on Main Street. He remembered me, and Noel. I handed him the envelope, said nothing as he read. His face changed slowly, line by line, until he finally set the papers down and looked me in the eye. "Mrs. Delaney," he said, "do you want to fight this quietly, or thoroughly?" I smiled. "Both." Mr. Halbrook worked fast. By Tuesday, he had filed a formal injunction with the county. A quiet one, no fireworks. No courtroom drama, just paperwork, clean, binding. The trust they tried to absorb? Frozen. The deed they planned to flip? Under review. And the part that made me smile: a certified letter requiring all future real estate or financial decisions involving my name to pass through me directly. No more slipping documents under my nose. No more, "Oops, must have forgotten to tell you." By Friday, the manila envelope was ready. I waited until brunch. Again. Same setting, same group, same drinks in long-stemmed glasses. She was in the kitchen, arranging sliced melon on a porcelain tray, when I walked in and set the folder down on the counter, right next to the mimosa pitcher. She glanced at it. "What's this?" she asked, still focused on her fruit. "Receipts," I said softly, "the paper kind." She finally looked up. Her eyes scanned the front page, highlighted emails, banking transfers, notarized signatures, and then the line in Mr. Halbrook's letter that said, "The undersigned retains full advisory rights over estate holdings established prior to 2020. That meant me. She went pale. "Where did you get this?" I didn't answer. Wade walked in a moment later, holding a plate of croissants. He saw her face, then saw mine. "What's going on?" I turned to him. I didn't raise my voice. "I trusted you," I said, "and you signed me away." He opened his mouth to defend. But the envelope was already open. The truth already poured out on the counter. Line by line. "I was grieving," I said, "and you were building a future that didn't include me." She tried to speak, something about miscommunication. About how things looked worse than they were. But the words tangled. Because the evidence didn't lie. Wade looked at her, then at me, then at the guests in the next room, who had gone quiet. I picked up the envelope and tucked it back into my bag. "I'll be moving out next week," I said, "into a place where I'm not an extra chair at the table." They didn't stop me. Didn't ask me to stay. They just stood there, frozen in their polished kitchen, as I walked past the mimosa glasses and the too perfect fruit and the woman who once cried in my arms, and now wanted me erased from her story. At home, I packed one suitcase. I left the photos, the dishes, even Noel's watch on the dresser. I took the letter he left me. And the blouse from Wade's graduation. At the door, I turned once, not to look back, but to see clearly. The life I built, the silence I allowed, the voice I reclaimed. Then I stepped outside. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone's mother-in-law. I felt like myself. My new place isn't fancy. It's a one-bedroom apartment above a bookstore on Maple Street, with creaky floors and a porch swing that leans a little to the left. But it's mine. There's no one barking orders down the hall. No labels on food in the fridge. No whispered conversations I'm not meant to hear. Just quiet. And this time, the quiet feels like peace, not punishment. I unpacked slowly. One suitcase, one set of linens, a few kitchen basics. No heirlooms, no things with stories attached to people who forgot I had one too. I bought a new mug. It says, "Good morning, sunshine." Cheesy, yes, but it makes me smile. And for the first time in a long while, I wanted to start each day smiling. On my second morning, the bookstore owner, Delilah, invited me down for coffee. She's maybe 10 years younger than me. Wears thick glasses and chunky earrings that clack when she laughs. I always wanted to open early for someone who appreciates the smell of paper and quiet mornings. She said. I didn't tell her everything. Just said I was starting over. She nodded, like she understood without asking. People like that are rare. Later that week, I signed up for a gardening class at the community center. Not because I needed to grow anything, except maybe myself. There were 8 of us in the room, 2 retired nurses. One very chatty divorcee, and a grandfather who brought his teenage grandson just to get him off the Xbox. We laughed. We dug our fingers into soil. We learned about roots. And how sometimes, the best thing you can do for a plant is repot it somewhere new. I walked home that day with dirt under my nails and something lighter in my chest. Wade called once. I didn't answer. He didn't leave a voicemail. She never called at all. Some nights, I wonder if they miss me. If they realize what they lost. But I don't dwell. Not anymore. Because for everything they tried to take, my place, my voice, my worth, I've started reclaiming something more valuable. My joy. It was a Sunday. The bookstore was closed. The sky was gray in that calm before a storm kind of way. I had just finished my tea and was halfway through folding laundry when I heard the knock. Not urgent, not soft, just familiar. I knew that rhythm. I stood still. The knock came again. I walked slowly to the door, heart steady, no rush, no fear. Through the peephole, I saw him. Wade. He looked tired, paler than I remembered, his hair uncombed, his shirt wrinkled. He wasn't holding flowers, or a gift, just his phone and a car key. I didn't open the door. Not yet. Instead, I stood behind it and said, "Why are you here?" He hesitated. Then, "Mom, I messed up." 3 words. Late, but honest. "I thought you wanted space," I replied. "I didn't realize how far we pushed you out." He said. "We." Not just him. "She said you were fine." He continued. "Said you liked being quiet. That you didn't want to be involved in things." "And you believed her?" I asked. He didn't answer. "I saw the listing," he said after a while. "The house. The documents. I didn't know she'd already started the process. I thought." He stopped. I should have known. I opened the door, just enough to see him. Just enough so he could see me. He looked older. Maybe I did too. "You didn't protect me," I said. He nodded. "I know. You called me a blessing at your wedding. Then you let her turn me into background noise." "I'm sorry." I studied his face. The boy I raised. The man I barely recognized. I don't hate you, I said, but I no longer bend myself to fit inside your life. He looked down. I understand. I'm okay now, I added. Actually, I'm better. He nodded again. I can see that. Silence stretched between us. Not awkward, just real. I'll let you get back to your day, he said, backing up. I just needed to say it. Thank you, I said. And then, before he could walk away, I added, take care of yourself. Learn to listen with your whole heart, not just your ears. He gave a small, sad smile. I'm trying. I closed the door gently. No slam. No drama. Just closure. A week after Wade came by, Delilah asked if I wanted to help with the bookstore's spring window display. I said yes. It started with a small corner, some gardening books, a ceramic bunny, a stack of pastel journals. But by noon, I had rearranged the whole window, layered the shelves, added soft yellow lights. Customers stopped to admire it. One even said, "It feels like home." Delilah grinned. "You've got the touch." No one had said that to me in years. Not about my cooking, not about my presence, not about anything. It wasn't much, but it filled something in me I didn't realize had been empty. The next day, she offered me a part-time job. Nothing heavy, just mornings. Organizing displays, chatting with regulars, brewing the first pot of coffee. I said yes again. Every day at the shop, I found something I hadn't felt in years: relevance. People asked my opinion. They thanked me for help. They remembered my name, not as someone's mother-in-law, not as a background character, but as Myrtle. On Thursdays, I led story time for kids. I read them old fairy tales, but I always changed the endings. In my versions, the overlooked grandmother didn't just bake cookies, she saved the kingdom. The ignored elder didn't disappear into the forest, she founded a village. The kids laughed. The parents stayed longer each week. Some started bringing me tea. One even called me Miss M. I smiled so much, my cheeks ached. On Sundays, I still got up early. But now, it wasn't to prep breakfast for people who wouldn't thank me. It was to walk to the farmer's market, pick out fresh flowers, and arrange them by the register. People noticed. One man said, "You've brightened this place." I used to be part of a house that dimmed me. Now, I was part of a place that bloomed. Spring melted into summer. The bookstore thrived. I had regulars now, people who greeted me by name, asked about my weekend, brought me peach scones, just because. There was a woman named Irene who said, "You remind me of my sister. She passed last year, but you have the same warmth." I didn't know what to say. So I hugged her. She came back every Wednesday after that. One afternoon, I was restocking a shelf when Delilah poked her head in and said, "There's someone here asking for you." I stepped out. It was her. My daughter-in-law. No makeup, hair in a bun, holding a small box in both hands like it was heavy. "I heard you work here," she said quietly. I nodded. She offered the box. Inside were the things I left behind: the watch, the graduation blouse, a card with no message, just my name. "I thought you'd want these," she said. "I'm sorry for everything." I looked at her. The woman who once pointed at me and said, "She's just the maid." She looked smaller now, not physically, but somehow quieter. I didn't say much, just took the box and nodded. "Thank you," I said. "Take care of Wade." She blinked. "You're not angry?" I smiled. "Anger is heavy, and I don't carry what doesn't serve me anymore." She left without saying another word. I stood by the window after she left, watching her car pull away. Then I turned back to my shelf and kept working. That night, I opened the card again. Still blank. Still silent. But this time, I didn't feel erased. Because I had rewritten the story. They once reduced me to an extra chair at the table. Now, I build the table. Host the space. Welcome the weary. And every time I hand someone a book or pour a cup of coffee, I remember. I am not just someone's mother-in-law. I am not a burden. I am not invisible. I am a woman who loved, who lost, who rebuilt, and who now lives. Not quietly, but fully.